PAC meeting. And so give your attention to this wonderful video made and produced by CCTA.
Due to COVID-19, this meeting will be conducted as a Zoom meeting pursuant to the provisions of the Governor's Executive Order N-2920, which suspends certain requirements of the Brown Act. This meeting is being live-streamed on the CCTA website. The chair will call upon members, staff, and other speakers by name. Please speak clearly and state your name before giving comments or remarks. Persons participating via Zoom with their cameras enabled are reminded that their activities are visible to viewers. Members participating by Zoom wishing to speak should physically raise their hand and unmute their mic when called upon. Members should remute their mics when done speaking. Citizens participating by Zoom wishing to speak should use the Raise Hand feature or dial *9 if participating via phone, and the chair or staff will call upon them at the appropriate time. Citizens will have 3 minutes to speak. A 30-second warning will be provided. After 3 minutes, staff will lower their hand and mute their mic. Participants via phone will be called upon by the last 4 digits of their phone number. It is requested that public speakers state their names and organization, but providing such information is voluntary. Written public comments received in accordance with the COVID-19 Special Notice for Public Comment Guidelines are printed on the meeting agenda. If authors of the written correspondence would like to speak, they should raise their hand and the chair will call upon them at the appropriate time. All written correspondence received after that and during the meeting will be entered into the record. A roll call vote will be taken for all action items. Thank you for participating in a meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority.
Okay, thank you for that video production. And we are going to go ahead and ask Marianne if she would conduct a roll call of the members who are present today.
All right, one moment. I'm letting Member Mitchoff in and making her a co-host so she can vote. All right, Member Allen, I did not see present. Okay, Member Haskew.
Here.
Member Mitchoff.
Here.
Member Narum.
Here.
Did I say that right?
It's close enough.
Okay.
Don't worry.
Member Obringer. Did not see her either. Oh, Alan's coming in. Member Perkins.
Here.
Member Ross.
Here.
Member Stepper.
Here.
Member Storer. Thought I saw. No, not present. Okay, Vice Chair Nowak.
Here.
Chair Anderson.
I'm here.
And I saw Member Allen come in. Let me find her here and make her a co-host. Okay, there you go. Okay, Member Allen.
Present, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we have Member Obringer and Member Storer absent.
Okay, great. And we also have 2 new member appointments by LAVTA, and Melissa Hernandez is appointed as the primary member as the Mayor of Dublin, and Kathy Narum as the alternate member. And tonight we're fortunate to have Kathy, Member Narum, with us this evening. So Kathy, do you want to just briefly introduce yourself to everyone?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm Kathy Narum. I'm a member of the Pleasanton City Council. I am coming up on 8 years of service on our great council, and I'm happy to be here. I was asked to come at the last minute, so unfortunately I do have another meeting at 7, so I will have to leave at 7, but it looks like you do in fact have enough for a quorum even without me. So,
great. Well, thank you. Thank you for being here tonight, Kathy. We really appreciate your end of 680 and the impact anything we do has on that as well. So at this time, I'm going to open it up for public comment. Have we received any public comment in writing, Tarianne?
No, we have not received any written public comment.
Okay, and then I will open it up for anyone who's present this evening for public comment. This is for any thing you wish to discuss that is under the purview of this committee, but is not on tonight's agenda. And so if there's anyone who wishes to speak under public comment, if you could please raise your virtual hand and Tarianne or I will call on you. And I am not seeing any.
No, I don't see any public comment.
Okay, so we are going to then, we have one item on our consent calendar this evening, and that is the approval of our minutes of our very concise and intense and lots that we got through. February 10th, 2021 meeting. Are there any changes, comments from the committee? Yeah.
Move to approve.
Second.
Move to approve. We've got a second. And before we go to the vote, I'm just going to make sure there's no one from the public who wishes to comment on our minutes. And I am not seeing any. So Terry, if you could please do a roll call vote.
Okay, Member Allen,
Yes.
Member Haskew,
Yes.
Member Mitchell,
I'm coming. Yes.
thank you. Member Neeram,
Yes.
Member Obringer, who's still absent. Member Perkins,
Yes.
Member Ross,
Yes.
Member Storer, don't believe is still absent. Okay, Member Stepper.
She's muted.
Oh, you're muted. I saw a head shake.
She's saying yes. We hear her saying yes.
I see you nodding your head. I'll take that as yes. Vice Chair Noah,
Yes.
Chair Anderson.
And yes as well. Okay, so
Motion,
oh, yes, I'm sorry.
sorry, motion passes with Obringer and Storer absent.
Thank you. I'm glad you announced that. Most of my committees, someone doesn't announce it. So thank you for doing that. So we are going to just move right on to our regular agenda items. And number 4A is informational. And Tim Hale is going to be presenting that to us as an update on our Innovate 680 program and project.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name's Tim Hale, the Executive Director of Contra Costa Transportation Authority, and really appreciate the opportunity and appreciate all of your time this evening to participate in another Policy Advisory Committee for Innovate 680. Without you, we could not really move forward the program the way we are. And I wanted to provide you a quick update of the programs and projects for Innovate 680. This is actually this meeting, because the last meeting was kind of running out of time, and we actually punted some items or forwarded some items to this meeting. So I do have an abbreviated update for you on the projects and programs so we can kind of get into the topics. So I'm going to share my screen really quick. And so for Member Norm, I know you're new to the committee, and so Innovate 680 is a comprehensive, cohesive, integrated strategy along the corridor that really provides multimodal improvements and mobility options along the corridor. It comprises of 6 total projects. The first project is the Express Lane Completion Project, and this is the what we call the northbound Express Lanes project that adds an express lane from Walnut Creek up to Martinez, to the Venetian Martinez Bridge. And we're continuing to identify and evaluate alternatives. And you'll actually hear more about this during one of the agenda items for the VMT mitigation strategies for the overall program. The part-time transit lane project, that project is continued to be on hold. However, we are starting to evaluate how to move that project forward, trying to take advantage of some new legislation to streamline the environmental document. We're also, just as an update, Assemblymember Mullins is actually carrying AB 476 for bus on shoulder legislation to enable a program for that. And so we're working closely with Assemblymember Mullins to make sure that that legislation really is tailored to help move forward our part-time transit lane project on I-680. We're working closely with our consultant, Kinley Horn, we're actually getting ready to move forward this project. This project has been on hold for quite some time, but because of the VMT, vehicle miles traveled strategy, we need to move this project forward. And this project is a feasibility study to identify a number of shared mobility hubs along the 680 corridor to support seamless integrated travel with transit and micromobility along the corridor. The automated driving system grant, we did receive the notice to proceed from Federal Transit Administration for that project, and we had our first kickoff meeting, which was very exciting to finally get that project kicked off with FTA and our private partners of Nissan, Verizon, Amazon Web Services, and also our public partners. And that moves on to mobility as a service. So we have been working on a scope of work for micromobility. And so we're working with Walnut Creek, Danville, and San Ramon to deploy some bike share programs along the corridor in those particular cities. And we're also developing and continuing the development of the software application. The Advanced Technology Project at the very end, we have been coordinating with Caltrans on an agreement to integrate ourselves with their rent metering project, as well as the kickoff meeting for that project as well. Those are the 6 projects. We also have a number of overall program disciplines within the Innovate 680 program. And so some highlights here: the traffic modeling operations. We just finished doing the analysis of the program level metrics, which I'm sure we'll be bringing back that to you in a future meeting. And then public engagement. You'll hear a lot about this evening, the behavioral science study. And we're actually preparing a series of presentations to update the authority board on the Innovate 680 program, essentially a mini series. So we're planning on holding about a 15 to 20 minute update at every authority board meeting starting in April and going all the way through October. System management. So we held our 9th Technical Advisory Committee Concept of Operations Working Group meeting to talk about one of the very challenging subjects of how we actually operate and maintain this completely integrated system along the corridor. And then from an environmental perspective, you'll hear more about this tonight, as well as part of the VMT strategies. And the corridor-wide support services, we're working along the entire corridor, gathering utility data. And so this is our update on the projects and programs. And again, I want to keep it abbreviated to keep more time for our more bigger topics. So I'll pause there and ask any questions, or if there's any particular topics you'd like to see us discuss at future meetings, please let me know.
Great update, Tim. So first I'm going to turn to committee members. Can you raise your virtual hand or flail, as I always say, flail at me wildly, if you have any questions for Tim on this? I am not seeing any, so let's go to the public as well. Is there anyone in the public who wishes to ask a question? If you could please raise your virtual hand. And I am not seeing any questions. Okay, too good a report, Tim. So let's move on. Next item is also going to be informational, and Lindsay Willis is going to present this with Rebecca Quaywick to discuss Innovate 680 Behavioral Science User Analysis Survey Findings. So getting into our head, those of us who are users. Lindsay, go ahead, please.
Good evening, commissioners. I think, Tim, you were going to share the presentation for everyone. So while we get this queued up, I will just say that we're very excited to give you an update on our behavior science study. I know we spoke about it very briefly at the end of our last meeting. And as many of you are aware, the Innovate 680 effort is really unique in many ways. And that extends to the way that we're trying to engage the public and really understand how they use the corridor and the thought process behind those decisions. And so part of our public engagement effort includes conducting a behavior science study. And as you've seen throughout this past year of PAC meetings, there are many sources of data available to us for the 680 corridor. We've got origin and destination data, average speeds, travel times, safety data, but the data doesn't always tell us the full story. It can tell us what happens, but not necessarily why. And that's what we're trying to get at through this behavior science effort. And in order to achieve the mode shift that's necessary to meet some of the greenhouse gas and vehicle miles traveled goals for this program, we're looking at how the research can help us design some different elements of this project to remove barriers or challenges for some travelers who want to get to their destination using something other than a single occupant vehicle. So this evening, I'd like to introduce Rebecca Quaywick with Convey, who's leading the public engagement and these research efforts with the assistance from Root Solutions and EMC Research to share with you what we're learning from our recent survey. So with that, Rebecca, feel free to take it away. And Tim, if you could advance to the next slide, that would be great.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me? Let's see.
You're good, Rebecca.
Thank you. All right. Hi, everyone. Great to see you again. And I'm really happy and equally excited with Lindsay to share some of our behavior science research. So we're going to dig right in, but first I'm going to spend just a couple minutes giving you just a little bit of an overview of what we've been up to. So next slide. So some of you may have learned in one of my previous presentations that our behavior research scope really includes 3 key elements, and each have a lot of importance in this effort. Landscape analysis reports help us find gaps in the available research. And then with that, we can develop some behavior drivers analysis, which is actually where our user analysis survey that we're going to talk about today, that's where that fits in. And from those 2 phases of work, we're going to come up with a series of intervention recommendations that can help us improve the projects as we're planning them and encourage mode shift, as Lindsay mentioned. Next slide. So that first deliverable was the landscape analysis reports. And as I mentioned, it really conducting these reports helped us understand gaps in the available research. And we were able then to develop our user analysis survey to fill in some of those gaps specific to Contra Costa County. So next slide. So that brings us to that survey, which was specifically designed for the Innovate 680 program, and it allowed us to collect some detailed transportation behavior data. And we asked questions about how people travel, how they might like to travel in the future, and also helped us get other necessary information to help us achieve behavior change and mode shift. So it's really kind of a one-of-a-kind survey. Next slide. So now with that, I'm going to share just a few key points about our methodology so you can understand just a little bit about how we accomplished this survey. Next slide. So first of all, we used an address-based sampling system, which involved mailing invitations to a random selection of 50,000 households within a desired radius of the I-680 corridor. And those were distributed, those invitations went out between November 2020 and January 2021. Next slide. Our survey was administered online mostly, but print versions were available upon request, and it was available in multiple languages. It took approximately 20 minutes to complete and covered a wide range of topics that were important to the Innovate 680 program. One of the strengths and differentiators I want to point out here about our survey is that it allowed us to get to dig a little deeper into psychological components like attitudes, beliefs, and even some perceptions or barriers about travel in the corridor. Next slide. So our goal was to get 1,500 surveys, and we accomplished that in early January with 1,533 surveys. We were also really excited with the responses because 1,000 of the respondents to that survey agreed to be contacted in the future for additional research about this program. And 950 of those 1,000 agreed to link their survey data to future travel data. And this is really exciting for us because this data linking will be helpful in demonstrating the success of our efforts to encourage mode shift with this program. Next slide. So at the end of the survey, I think you'll all be excited to see that respondents were given a chance to provide feedback, and most of what we received was really, really positive. So in general, I think corridor residents are really excited to be participating in the future of transportation, and they're excited that Contra Costa Transportation Authority is taking this on. Okay, next slide. Now some key demographics about our survey takers. Next slide. As you can see, the survey respondents were pretty equally distributed between male and female. And we also found that the ages of our survey takers were mostly over the age of 35. And we looked into census data for the county just generally, and we found that these demographic data points were very representative of Contra Costa. Next slide. Now a quick household snapshot. These are always fun to see. So about 78% of our survey respondents are homeowners. And in those homes, the average home had about 2 of everything: 2 people, 2 smartphones, 2 cars, and 2 driver's licenses. And next slide. And so that's a little snapshot into the household of our audiences, but now we're actually going to talk a little bit more about that audience. And Tim, you can advance it. So we've defined our first target audience here as those 70% of corridor residents that use the I-680 corridor once per week or more. And this is a pre-COVID number. Now, this is a very broad category that we're going to narrow in a bit to a much smaller subset later. Okay, next slide, Tim. So the most commonly used mode for our target audience was driving alone in a personal vehicle. We want to note that respondents here, they were asked to select all pre-COVID modes that they've used. So this tells us that driving alone in a personal vehicle was the most popular answer, but it certainly wasn't the only mode that was used by our target audience. Okay, next slide. It was encouraging to see that even though we do have a lot of drivers, there is an interest in driving less. So this chart shows that at least 68% of that target audience is interested in driving less. Next slide. And their reasons for wanting to drive less included environmental impact, which ranked the highest, as you can see, but it was closely followed by not wanting to sit in traffic and reducing stress. So these are some things that we're going to think about as we plan our projects for the future. And then next slide. Okay, so this is where it's going to get fun, because we're going to take that broader target audience and we're going to narrow it just a little bit and look closer at a subset that we might have the most success changing behaviors. And we've given this high priority audience a name. Next slide. We're calling these people our champions of change. These are daily drivers who are interested in driving less. So you might remember that the 70% we featured before are drivers who use the corridor once per week or more. But these are daily drivers who are interested in driving less. And these champions make up about 44% of all of our corridor drivers. Next slide. So where these champions live was fairly equally distributed throughout the cities of the corridor, with Concord and Clayton being the outliers with the highest and the lowest percentages of champions. Next slide. Our champions appeared to be clustered in those middle age groups, with about 70% of them being between the ages of 35 and 64. I also want to highlight here that with regard to gender, it was again pretty equally distributed here, with 47% of our champions being male and 51% being female. Next slide. So now the question becomes, what behaviors or modes are we interested in changing from and changing to? So as we saw above, the favored mode among our target audience, including our champions, is driving alone in a personal vehicle. Next slide. And this is better known as single occupancy vehicles, which are major contributors to greenhouse gas emissions and poor air quality. So what you're seeing in this fun little graphic here is that a typical passenger vehicle emits about 4.6 metric tons of carbon dioxide per year. And it takes 6 acres of US forest land to counteract this emission. So switching away from SOVs to alternative modes of transportation would have really important and positive impacts on congestion and the environment. Next slide. So studies have shown that public transit, carpooling, walking, or biking all help to reduce the volume of motorized vehicles on the road. So with this in mind, our goal is to really take our champions of change and motivate them to shift modes to some of these alternative modes. Next slide. So that helps us narrow our questions a bit to what modes would yield the most new users in our champion group and what modes would yield the least. Next slide. We've asked our champions about the likelihood of them using new and alternative modes. And on the next couple of slides, we're going to show you how they answered those questions. Next slide. So our champion group responded that they would be most likely to try telecommuting or carpooling with members of their household. These were followed closely though by taking private buses or shuttles, BART, public bus, and rail. Next slide. The modes that they're least likely to try are bike share and van pool. And then there's a few other mentioned there as well. Next slide. So we also wanted to check in though and see and explore what percentage of our champions have used alternative modes at least some of the time in the past. And we can work with these groups to maintain or increase their use of each of these modes, which is another really helpful angle to take when trying to get mode shift. So we understand also that it's not important to, it's getting new users is not the only way to achieve mode shift. It's also really helpful to encourage these existing users because they're already over that first ride hurdle. And we can get them to use it more frequently, which can also help take cars off the road. Next slide. So finally, with our champions, we also wanted to look at, we were very curious about the perceived barriers to using these alternative modes. You can see here that availability and reliability ranked the highest. And this is going to help the Innovate 680 program and all of its projects sort of focus on how to mitigate these barriers or perceived barriers so that they're no longer an issue. That would go a long way to getting people to shift modes. So that segues nicely to our next section. Tim, if you don't mind advancing. And this is where we're going to give a snapshot of how our behavior research is helping us to develop the Innovate projects so that barriers are lessened and mode shift is made easier. Today, I'm focusing just on 3 of the 6 projects, but there's more to come. So first we have the shared mobility hubs. And our behavior research showed that nearly half of the corridor residents combined different modes of transportation for a single trip in the year prior to COVID. And this project is designed to make combining modes easier. We also learned that a majority of that audience is very interested in using hubs and that they're willing to walk or bike about 12 to 15 minutes to get to a hub. And they also value frequent, reliable transit service and on-site security. So all of these things are things that our teams and our leaders on this project are working to incorporate into project plans. Next slide. We also asked potential new riders what transit features they were most interested in, and the top 3 were free Wi-Fi, comfortable seating, and power outlets or USB ports. By adding and advertising these features, we're increase transit ridership and persuade people out of their cars. Next slide. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about the Advanced Driving Systems project. Here, autonomous shuttles are really a cornerstone element, and they are also key to ensuring that no one's left behind in our communities of concern. So through our survey, we learned that 72% of our corridor residents are interested in using AV shuttles when they become available, but they do have some concerns like wait times and safety. So again, the Innovate teams and leaders will be working to alleviate these concerns and take advantage of that really impressive interest level in taking this alternative mode. Next slide. So just to close out right now, I'd like to take a quick look back at our champions of change. We've calculated that if we can get our champions to cut their driving in half, we could reduce the number of drivers on the road by 22%. This translates into a reduction of roughly 37,000 cars per day. Now, this is definitely aspirational because 22% is not easy to achieve. I think I would equate it to trying to get my kids to eat a salad 3 days a week, and that's not an easy thing to do, so this is tough. But any shift like this could lead to less congestion, better air, and safer roads. So as we move forward with our behavior research, we're really going to try to use it to come up with strategies and get close to this or make this happen for better program outcomes and meeting our program goals. So with that, I think I'm at the end of my presentation and would love to address any questions.
Let's go to the committee first. Any questions or comments? We are a very quiet committee this evening. Okay, let's go right to the public. Oh wait, or Debbie, is that your hand?
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't quite get to the
No.
raising my hand function, but I see Mark Ross and Karen have hands up too.
Yes.
I just wanted to mention really, well, first of all, thank you for this information. This is useful as a BARC director to see what drives these behaviors. But it is interesting to me to see that at least a couple of the things that you found were really kind of top of the list for people seem to be a couple of the things that we're going in an opposite direction on. So I think these are things I'm going to be able to take back to BART and present to them and say, well, but look at this. So thank you. This is good work. I would like to, are the slides posted online on the website?
I believe they will be,
Okay.
if they're not already. That might be a question for Danielle.
I would like to share this presentation. I guess we have a recording of it that I can share.
Yeah, well, and Terry can send them to us this evening or tomorrow. She's very good about sending slides out, so that would be terrific.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
I'll post it to the website tomorrow. It's very large, but it will be posted to the public meetings webpage.
Okay, and then maybe just send us a link to it because it doesn't sound like it would work to send us the document.
Yeah, will do.
Thank you. Okay, Karen Stepper. But you've got to unmute yourself in order for us to really hear you.
Okay, let's try again. Okay, I'm sorry. The first couple times you kept telling me to unmute and I was hitting the unmute and it wouldn't work. So I think I was entered in the wrong box is what happened. So I appreciate what you've brought to us today, Lindsay and Rebecca. But when I was going through your presentation, it started with subsets right away to those that were interested in doing this and achieving this. And I understand the need to do that. But what I didn't catch was the part that those people who were not interested in changing, that we make sure we know why, because those may be another subset of people we need to address. And I didn't see any data that went that direction.
Okay.
That's correct. I believe we have that data, and there is literally just so much data. And Lindsay, I'll let you speak to this too. So there's a lot of different ways to slice and dice it, and we will certainly be looking into all subsets, interested and not interested.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
At a future meeting, maybe bring us the top 5 reasons if you're able to lump. I mean, there are a multitude of reasons, but again, I'm sure that's what you're using in order to come up with the solutions of trying to address those needs. Okay, Mark, let's go right to you.
Thank you. Interesting presentation. I'm curious about money is a great motivator, and $4 a gallon, $4.50 a gallon is not chump change. So our champions of change, they have the ulterior motives to save the environment and also to save them stress. I'm just wondering how hard, if the data might show, how solid those first 2 categories are versus the 47% category of saving money. Because that money is the ultimate driver for a lot of people. They will say to a poll, yeah, I want to save the environment, or no, I'm not voting for Donald Trump. They'll say things to make themselves feel good. The actuality might be different. Is there any data that might support how strong those top 2 tiers are?
Lindsay, do you want to speak to that first, or?
Yeah, I think that as Rebecca said, we literally have so much data from all of these people that we're still sifting through it, and what you're getting is kind of the tip of the iceberg. And so I think that we did ask them in 2 separate places in the survey to kind of rank their motivators for why they might want to drive less. One was kind of an open-ended question where they could select the answer themselves, and one was they were given a list of things to choose from, which is that list you saw, less stress, I want to have a better impact on the environment, etc. So one of the things that we could do and bring back to the next meeting, maybe with some of those top 5 and just a handout or something, is maybe dive a little deeper into kind of how those 2 answers compared, because they were asked at different points in the survey, and get a sense of kind of how strong the motivation was when they were unprompted versus prompted in that answer.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was looking for. And as somebody who just came up from Dublin to Walnut Creek at 4:30 today, yeah, there's we're back.
Where we were. Yeah.
We're back where we were, and people are not letting people change lanes, even when you wave and have your turn signal on, I noticed, very unfortunately. One of the follow-up questions, if you could ask our subjects that have agreed to continue in this, would they be more amenable to carpooling with non-household members if there was proof of vaccination, if there was some type of verification of vaccination? Would that entice them to a carpool even more? And with that, I'm done.
Okay, interesting. And hopefully by the time this rolls out, everyone will be vaccinated. So plug for vaccinations. We're at just over 60% of Contra Costa have their first vaccine as of today, the most recent statistics. Okay, any other committee members who want to comment on this? My only comment, I mean, I think all of the information is very relevant, and I know that Muni is talking about free rides, and I know on County Connection, we increase ridership the most when we offer free rides. I mean, it's just sort of the reality. If you can, that's one of the greater incentives, to have it convenient, reliable, and cheaper. And to sort of Mark's point about the gas, but free is even better when you're not scrambling to make sure you have your right Clipper card or the whatever device you need. And as we hopefully shift Clipper to our phones, that may be behind us. And as we have a uniform method of payment, maybe not as much an issue, but that's one thing that comes to mind. Okay, members of the community that are here, or staff members, does anyone want to raise their hand if they have any questions, comments with regard to this? Once again, such an agreeable bunch. Okay, then I think we are going to move right on. I appreciate this. And this is our next item is also informational. And Carl Hawk is going to be presenting that, and Richard Galvin, to discuss the Innovate 680 program approach for Senate Bill 743.
Hello. Danielle, is the sound okay?
You are good, Carl.
Thank you. My name, as I was introduced, is Carl Hack. I'm with the firm Graybo and Scott, and serving as the Innovate program's Deputy Corridor Manager for Project Delivery, which is a bit of a mouthful. And I'll be discussing the implementation of Senate Bill 743 for transportation projects, and also the approach the program is taking in addressing the new traffic analysis and mitigation requirements resulting from the bill. With us tonight are Rich Galvin from GPA Consulting and Mike Aronson from Kittleson and Associates. Rich is the program's environmental discipline lead, and Mike is on the traffic discipline team. And they're both here to help me with any questions at the end of the presentation. So with that, let's jump in. Next slide, please. So Senate Bill 743, the bill aligns California's priorities for improving transportation systems and housing with meeting climate targets and environmental commitments. It essentially changes the way we think about and analyze transportation projects. And it also correlates to some of the input that we got through the behavioral science, in that if folks want to drive less, how do we give them the ability to do that? So rethinking how we build so we can drive less. Some background on the bill and the implementation. The legislation was signed actually way back in 2013. For the next 5 years or so, the Office of Planning and Research developed new metrics for identifying and mitigating impacts of VMT under CEQA. And then in the last year or so, Consistent with the new metrics and new CEQA guidelines, Caltrans adopted vehicle miles traveled as a measure of significance for projects on the state highway system and developed guidance for the implementation. That guidance, next slide, please, is really codified or presented in two documents. The first is transportation analysis under CEQA, commonly referred to as the TAC, which provides information to support CEQA practitioners in making CEQA significance determinations for transportation impacts. And the other is the Transportation Analysis Framework, commonly referred to as the TAF, which provides guidance on the preferred approach for analyzing VMT attributable to proposed projects, essentially the induced travel in project settings. So this is all relatively new to the transportation industry. So I thought it would be a good idea to talk about some definitions. So vehicle miles traveled, the simplest definition is you jump in your car and you go a mile, that's a VMT, regardless of how many people are in the vehicle with you. Another way to look at VMT is VMT per capita, which takes all those vehicle miles traveled and then divides it by the total population. Another very important, no, you had it right, Tim. Important definition is induced travel. And this kind of goes back to the comment by Mr. Ross. So it's this phenomena that when you improve the system or it changes, and that results in reduced travel times and cost, then people change behavior and start utilizing that system. So this chart shows the demand versus the existing network and the improved network. And so as the network gets improved, my travel time is reduced, my costs are reduced. So I am likely to use the new system, and then over time it fills up and we're back to the congested state again. Next slide, please. Okay, so how does all this relate to the Innovate program? So as this slide shows, and as Rebecca referred to earlier, a lot of the projects like Smart Mobility Hub and Part-Time Transit Lane would actually probably reduce VMT because it provides a different mode for folks to take rather than the highway. The one project within the program that will likely increase VMT is the Express Lane Completion Project. And even though that's for HOVs or single occupant vehicles that, that would pay to utilize it, it does create capacity, which would then induces travel demand. So we, under the guidance and leadership of Tim and Stephanie, the program realized that early on. And so we've been working for about a year or so on how to implement within the program, both from a program perspective and the project's perspective on the Express Lane completion. And in the last few months, we've been working closely with Caltrans to advance the traffic analysis, and then we've initiated mitigation considerations. So the next slide shows the process that's in the guidance, both the TAC and the TAF. And I'm not sure you can see it, but the boxes highlighted in blue are have been accomplished. And so on the traffic side, we've worked with our partners and actually Caltrans headquarters, and they have accepted the analysis we're doing for the VMT. And that's led us to the indication that we will need to be mitigating. And so now the team is starting to look at what are possible mitigations or potential mitigation. So the next slide. So over the last year or so, we've considered various strategies and options. One of the early ones was similar to other mitigations for sensitive habitat that would be impacted by our project. We looked at a potential for a VMT mitigation bank or exchange. What we found is that those take a lot of time to put in place and would not be feasible for the program and project timeline. We also looked into utilizing toll lanes, and other fees generated to offset VMT through various programs. Months ago or a while back, CCTA and MTC met and discussed that potential, but the express lanes and the limited funds that are available after O&M, this wasn't considered a viable option. So from there, we've also considered looking at or utilizing VMT projects, utilizing VMT reducing projects in the program to offset the VMT increasing projects, and that's still under consideration. And we're also looking at developing specific transit and active transportation strategies to mitigate VMT. And I believe the transit at those types of strategies, based on research, probably have the highest likelihood of being acceptable as mitigation for increased VMT. So the next steps are to continue to refine and screen out potential mitigation measures, including utilizing the VMT reducing projects in the program. And once we've gone through that, we'll be continuing to meet with our partners at Caltrans to gain their input and ultimately their consensus on proposed mitigation. And then that proposed mitigation would be included in the express lane completion project's environmental record and implemented as part of the project. So in summary, CCTA and the Innovate program team have been at the forefront of SB 743 implementation. The express lane completion project is one, if not the first project in the state to go through this process. CCTA, others in the transportation industry realize that, and we've been coordinating with other partners on experiences we've gained so far. And we will continue to work with the program partners to gain acceptance of the methodology for achieving the mitigation. And the last thing I would like to note, while this is focused on the Innovate program and essentially 680 and the 680 projects, CCTA is also working on the development of a VMT mitigation framework for Contra Costa that could be utilized by local jurisdictions. They were successful in receiving a grant, Sustainable Transportation Planning Grant. And that work is planned to start later this month, separate from the Innovate program, but looks very interesting as far as achieving those objectives as well. And with that, concludes the presentation, and any questions or comments?
Okay, and committee members, let's start out with you. Anyone have any questions? Not seeing the virtual hands, not seeing the real hands. Okay, we're going to go to the public or whoever else is in the meeting right now. And once again, I am not seeing any virtual hands. So thank you very much for the update on that legislation. It'll be interesting to see how that moves forward, as well as the other endeavors that are going forward. Okay, so next we are going to be moving right on to another informational item, and Liz Justison is going to be presenting this one, and Danielle Stanislaus, and they're going to talk a little bit more about Innovate 680 Technical Advisory Committee concept of operations development on transit-related policy issues. A mouthful of a title, but we know they'll make it very succinct and clear.
I sure hope I do. A nice job pronouncing my last name. Everybody gets that right off the bat. So I'm Liz Justison. I am the system manager lead and with WSP. And today I'm going to be talking about some of the transit-related policy issues that have arisen as we've been working on the program level concept of operations. And I want to acknowledge that this is something we actually brought to this group in February, but as we recall, it was getting pretty late, so I sped through these slides. So what we want to do today is reintroduce these policy topics and have a little bit more time for actual discussion around them. So next slide. So when we started developing the concept of operations, in order to have the full vision that you've seen in other presentations of a user getting out or waking up in the morning and figuring out how they're going to start their day and how they're going to get to work. They open an app. They have a bunch of options to get from their home to their place of work. And they are provided with options from having a shared autonomous vehicle pick them up and bring them to BART, or getting into their own vehicle. There's information on price and time that's provided to them to help them make the best decision. In order to make that vision for Innovate 680 come together, there's a lot of technical considerations and then a lot of policy considerations. So next slide. We hear a lot about the different projects that make up the 680 Innovate program. And behind all of those projects are systems. And today in the Bay Area, we have a lot of existing systems. We have transit systems, we have 501 systems, we have freeway systems, we have communication systems. And what the system architecture diagram is trying to get at is articulating for everybody how important it is that we're going to have all of these systems talking together to bring that end vision together for the user. It requires real-time communication between all of these different existing and new systems that we'll bring on board. But it's not just the physical talking of all the systems. There's a lot of key policies that we need to have that we need to get through to also make it come to life. So as we've been developing the program concept of operations, we've been walking through some of the key policy decisions. And I'm going to highlight some of the bigger program concepts, policy concepts, before we dive into the transit specific ones. So next slide. So in order for us to bring that vision to life, there was 4 key assumptions that we had to go with. And the first is that we're going to have a centralized decision to support system. Sorry. And what that means is there's basically one head end to all of the systems that's gathering all the data and spitting out decisions. So for instance, what that means is if the freeway is having an incident, that incident information would go back to the decision support system and say, I need to start slowing down the ramp metering. And then I also need to make sure that I am communicating that through the app so people can start making some decisions that maybe they want to go ahead and get on BART or take walk or get on at a different interchange. But it requires is that there is one centralized system gathering all of that information and making decisions upon it. So this is one of the key policies that we needed to assume in order to make the vision come to life. We also needed to assume that there was one data center for all of this. So while the systems are doing all of their pieces, they need data to rely on to make their decisions. So for an order, another example would be that there might be at one of the mobility hubs, bike parking, where we need to have information on how in real time, how many bikes are available there. So that information and that data is going to need to be collected by the one central data hub and used by the decision support system to spit out and let everybody know how to make other decisions based upon this. So what it means is that we're having all of our different regional partners share in both data and their systems to make this come to life. Next slide. Some other key components were that we'd have to have delegated control. So a really good example of this is the express lane closures or having signal timings on our arterials. We might have it that there's something that's happening on the freeway and it needs to impact how the signal timing is happening on the arterials. And sorry, I have a train going by me. The local owners of the arterials would be delegating control to the system that is going to slow down their timing. That's what delegating control is. You're relinquishing your control to allow for the head-end system to make decisions on how your system is operating. And we're also assuming that this is going to happen in real time, because in order for Innovate to work, we can't have operators intervening and making decisions. That takes 5-10 minutes. In 5-10 minutes, things change. So we're assuming there's a system of algorithms in the background that are spitting out and making decisions. These are algorithms that would be revisited, that stakeholders would be able to look at and modify, but we're assuming that all these decisions are made by the system in real time through automated control. But lastly, that we would have an operations center, and that operations center would be staffed with operators to ensure that the system is working, because we will do everything we can to make sure that all these systems are talking and working. But if there was an incident in which something failed or that we needed to change how the system is operating, we want to make sure that we have the ability to have operators intervene. So those are some of the bigger picture policies that we've are assuming to make Innovate come together. What I want to do is, oh, actually, sorry, one more slide. So those are just some of the big key assumptions we had come together. There's a lot of the other ones that we also need to flesh out as we're developing the program level concept of operations. But what we're going to do today is dive into 4 of the transit specific policies. And I'm going to walk through the 4 different policies that we want to get your feedback on, and then we'll facilitate a discussion around them. So let's go to the next slide. You go one more, Tim. So the first one is connection protection. So what is connection protection? When I first heard the term, I thought it meant that you always made sure that there was you held one transit system for another. And I thought I couldn't see how it worked. And once it was explained to me, it made so much more sense. So what it means is that you're using real-time arrival data and ensuring that sometimes when there might be, it might be the last trip of the day, or it might not be that another train is coming for another 40 minutes, or that you have an X number of patrons wanting to make the transfer, that you would hold in real time one transit system for another transit system. So what we're looking to get feedback on is, are transit agencies willing to dynamically hold? What are the parameters that they might need to consider? Like, would it only be if it's the last train of the day or the last bus of the day? Would it only be if there's a certain number of patrons? Or if there's a certain amount of time that they would have to wait. This is something that airlines are starting to do on a routine basis, so that you have just basic criteria around when would you make that decision to hold, so that you can allow travelers to make that connection seamlessly. So that's our first transit policy issue. So I'm going to go through all 4 of them, and like I said, and then we'll get to talking about it. The next one is data sharing. So when I talked originally about one of our key assumptions, that we have this data hub that's allowing us to make all these great smart decisions and have the Innovate program spitting out information to the public in real time and having systems change what they're doing based upon how other systems are working, that requires that agencies are giving their data to the Innovate system for them to make real-time decisions, and also providing access to performance data, because the only way that Innovate will work is if it's continuously refreshed. We want to make sure we're looking at it on a, probably at the very beginning, a daily, then a weekly, then a monthly basis, to see how we need to change to make sure we're having all the systems operate at optimum levels. So the issue we're trying to get at is, are agencies willing to share both real-time and performance data? We know that there's a lot that goes around this, around cybersecurity and making sure that we're protecting PII, but we want to fundamentally understand, are people and agencies willing to share both real-time and performance data? The next one is part-time shoulder use. So we've talked a lot about the project, which is the part-time shoulder program, but what we really haven't talked about is how this looks for the actual transit operators. So currently the idea is that when there is a congestion on the freeway, that buses would use the shoulder for free flow to improve and have reliable travel times when there's congestion during peak periods. And we have not really discussed what that looks like from a transit operator's perspective. What's the criteria for them for having their bus operators drive in what might not be a typical situation? Are there freeway conditions of variable speeds between the shoulder and the freeway that they would want to see before they would allow their drivers to drive in the lane? And lastly, I want to make sure that I acknowledge that what we're talking about here is just from the transit perspectives, that there are a lot of concerns raised by CHP from a safety perspective, and those are being looked at. And I just want to make sure we know that we've heard that and we're making those considerations. But what we're looking at really is here from the transit providers' perspectives of what you would need to feel comfortable having your bus drivers drive in a shoulder lane. And the last one is really more of a regional issue, but I want to dive in a little bit on the transit provider's perspective on how fare integration would work for Innovate 680. Like we said, one of the best parts of this is that a user is going to get up in the morning and they're going to look at their app and figure out how they're going to make their travel to their office or to their doctor's appointment, and they're going to be provided with fare information. But today, that fare might be made up of 4 different fares. And could we be looking at something a little bit different for Innovate 680 that would provide them a flat fare or a distance-based fare or a zone fare that would work for 680? Now, being cognizant that this is happening, a bigger discussion is happening in the region around fare integration. I want to see the thoughts on how we can feed information back to the region on this, or take information from the region and see how we want to have it applied to Innovate 680. So those are the 4 policy issues. I think I'm going to pause here and pass the baton to Danielle for some discussion.
Thanks, Liz. Danielle Stanislaus, also part of the system management team with Emergent Transportation Concepts. So we wanted to have some discussion with you all, especially since we breezed through this very quickly at the last meeting. So as Liz was saying, to put this into context, we wanted to make sure to highlight through our ConOps development those issues that really are of a policy nature that we really do need to articulate and identify within the ConOps document itself. So we've been working collaboratively with your staff through the TAC and the TAC ConOps working group that is inclusive of Caltrans, MTC, CHP, FHWA. And we've been really working through in a very collaborative manner a lot of these issues, but these 4 in particular, and some others, got identified and highlighted as warranting some additional discussion with you all. So we wanted to take a pause and allow for us to go back, and we can highlight any particular slide and go back in the deck, but to allow you all to have some more discussion. And as Liz just said, even though there are some of these issues that are more regional in nature, we feel like there's a lot of value in understanding the local perspective, both because that's going to get documented in the ConOps and allow us to track that conversation going forward, but also because we can carry that back into the regional conversations. So with that, the 4 issues on the left side of the screen that Liz just walked through, we wanted to open it up to you all if you had particular thoughts, any of the questions, issues that Liz raised, because any feedback you give to us today, we're going to document in the program ConOps, because that's going to allow us to identify the next steps associated with where those policy conversations need to go, what resolution needs to happen, and any future agreements that might need to occur between any of the involved parties to make that a reality, to bring the larger program vision to fruition. So at this time, I guess, Madam Chair, I'd ask for your assistance with opening it up to the larger group. And like I said, we can go back in the slides to any of the 4 issues that you all would like to speak to.
Okay, terrific. And we already have Karen Stepper from Danville has her hand up. So Karen, let's have you.
Hey,
I
have my mute off. That's good. Okay, so I'm most concerned about holding things for the next train or the next person because somebody's late. It's not any different than starting a meeting and everybody's there on time except 3 people. And so you wait, and those 3 people, the other 7 that were already there really had something to go to right away and couldn't put those extra minutes. So I'm really concerned about how you structure that. I understand, like the last train of the day, something, you really don't want to lose people. And 5 minutes, you hope that it's not going to catch very many. But if you did it frequently through the day, and I don't know how integrated, I'm not asking your answer, but this is my concern, that the people that counted on it being on the time that they got on get there at that time. So, and the exceptions be few and far between. So thank you.
Okay, so do you want to respond as we go, or do you want to have all the comments and then we'll go back?
Yeah, I wasn't looking for a response. I was just looking to give her data for going forward.
Okay, well, so why don't we go ahead and we'll just have all of the comments, the questions. We've got Sue, and then Deborah has her real hand up, and then we'll go to Mark. So we'll start with Sue, Deborah, then Mark.
Thanks. No, I actually had the exact same question as Karen did, or statement about, this delayed connection, making sure we look at both sides of it, not only holding it for the people that need a connection, but the impact to the other people. The other policy question is really on the shoulder, bus on shoulder concept. Because I think I joined 3CTA 6 years ago now, and this seems to be something that just, I don't know, are we ever going to get to a decision on this point? I know, to me, it just seems like the CHP has been looking at this now for at a minimum 6 years. And so, the kind of question I'm thinking of policy-wise is, are we ever going to get to a point where we had a conclusion on this one to be able to move forward?
Okay, let's move on to Deborah, and then we'll sort of have response from our experts if one is merited and needed. Okay, Debbie, go ahead, please, and then we'll go to Mark.
Well, thank you. First, I'll just mention that I do not have the ability to raise my hand in this forum. I'm not sure why, but I've searched all the buttons. There's no way for me to do it.
Okay.
So there's got to be a setting that needs to be changed. Anyway, I'll move on. Connection protection. I think that BART is probably, I'd have to have some conversation with the operations manager and management of BART. But typically we've been very strict on our schedules, and there is not a lot of leeway in the way that our trains cross over between tracks and through the Transbay tube for us to do much with respect to holding trains for connections. Now that might be more possible in 8-9 years from now when we have a new train control system. So, but that's far down the road, and we could have that discussion. I'll have more discussions with BART staff, and I guess I would have to get back to them. But my understanding is you have meetings with the technical side and the operators as well. So I'm guessing you're going to get better answers on that from them. The last train of the day, maybe there is some flexibility, but again, I don't think there is a lot. With respect to the data sharing, it's an interesting question. And again, I would have to go back and talk with BART about sharing the data that they collect, and we collect a lot of data. But I was on, coincidentally enough, a call earlier today from the Center for Transit Research or something like that on the East Coast. And they were raising the very issue of securing people's personal data. And there's great conversation and concern going on the East Coast about simply the clipper card that you swipe, and now we are moving to that clipper card being on your phone, which actually has now identifiable data on it. And so there's a lot of sticky issues with respect to sharing of data. Let's see, part-time shoulder use. I think, I would agree with Sue that I hope we get there. There doesn't seem to be another alternative, but it's been a long time. On fare integration, there's a lot of work going on with Seamless Bay Area in this arena, and all the transit operators are discussing this. So, I've actually been on the positive side of fare integration, and I don't know, BART has typically resisted this, and it's because BART before the pandemic, we were getting approximately 65% of our revenue from fares. And there's a great concern about the discussions that are going on with MTC of who exactly would control who gets what. And, that is really the question. So those are my thoughts. I can go back and have more detailed information at the next meeting. But I did notice we have Kamala Parks on the call here tonight. And so if I would actually ask that if she has some further insight, which I suspect she does, that maybe she also gives some feedback from the BART perspective. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. If anyone is having trouble raising hands, right on this forum, it's usually you hit reactions, and then the lower beside your clapping hands up hearts is a raise hand. So try that if anyone else is having trouble raising a hand. Mark, you're not having trouble raising your hand, so go ahead and let's have you go.
Thank you. I just on two items. One, the shoulder busts on the shoulder, that has taken forever. There's got to be some type of resolution on that. It's an obvious, not so obvious answer, but the logistics can be worked out. As for connection protection, the reticence that people have to getting on public transit now is other people for various reasons. But if you add to that list of objections to taking transit, that other people are going to make me wait, that's just another nail in the coffin. People rely on the trains being on time, transit being on time. You set up your 511 planner based on a certain schedule and arrival time. And there's not, even if you have the capacity to spare a minute or two, everybody on the train's aggravated. You're just aggravated because you know that it's being held up for those 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 people that are perennially late, and eventually they know they can be late. And if they know that there's going to be some fudge time, they'll avail themselves of it. It's human nature. And then the other people, like Sue said, the other 7 people that are at the meeting, we're all usually annoyed. The meeting starts when the meeting starts. The train should leave when the train should leave. That's my opinion. Thanks.
Okay, well, and I'm sure glad I started this meeting right at 6 o'clock. Okay, Liz, let's go to you and followed by Kamala.
Oh my gosh, thank you for having me. And I got in late just like 10 minutes ago because I had another meeting. So I am a district director for BART in the Fremont area and interested in 680 and this innovation of transformation for buses on shoulder. And I actually bumped into Caltrans director for District 11 in San Diego at a conference. This was pre-pandemic. And they had worked with the CHP. I don't know how long it took. I didn't realize it was 6 years for this group, which is painful. But they worked with the CHP. They came up with a plan to work with the bus drivers. The CHP and the bus drivers communicate before there's a traffic accident. They are notified via radio, I believe, and they know exactly when they can merge out of the lane if there's an accident on the shoulder. The bus drivers got specific training on how to collaborate with the CHP. And they also, I believe, got special equipment on the buses, but I can't recall the details of what that equipment was supposed to do. Maybe that was related to the metering lights. I'm not sure. But if you contact the district director for Caltrans district, I guess it's Caltrans District 11, they have extensive experience in this. And maybe the CHPs in the different areas can talk to each other, but that's all I have to say. But I appreciate you allowing me to speak on this one particular issue.
Thank you, Liz. Okay, Kamala.
Mute. Sorry, just figuring out how to do everything with the raising the hands and everything. So thank you, Director Allen and Director Ames. This is Kamala Parks from BART. And yes, I've been working on the TAC and we've been bringing up these exact issues, particularly Director Allen, you had mentioned the concerns about BART in terms of schedules and all these other things. So we are definitely coordinating internally in terms of, how we're addressing the issues of coordination, both for schedule and fare. And like Director Allen mentioned, I did want to echo the fact that BART is very much a part of the fare integration and in fact leading a lot of efforts in that way. So that's to help with the whole seamless travel options and trying to get everyone sort of as using it as an integrated system. So we are definitely active and bringing our concerns, but also trying to be a good partner.
Okay, great. Thank you. We appreciate that insight. Tim, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to make a few comments here. So relative to connection protection, we're not talking about holding the bus for a very long period of time or holding a train for a very long period of time. We're actually doing a pilot right now with Tri-Delta Transit and UC Berkeley PAC. And what we found is you're not holding all buses, you're only holding the buses that need to be held, and it's done through a mobile application. And typically that holding of a bus would only occur from a period of like 2 to 5 minutes max. And that's what they were testing. And through that testing, they actually improved connections by 60 to 70%, which thereby increased ridership. And so by just holding that bus just for a few more minutes does improve connections significantly. And as if you go back to the behavior analysis that we saw earlier, what people are looking for is reliability and convenience. And so by holding these buses by just a few minutes provides that reliability, thereby increases ridership. So connection protection can be a good thing if used properly in the right forms. And so we've been getting a lot of success with Tri-Delta, so much success that other counties are actually starting to look at connection protection. So Solano Transportation Authority, they're starting to look at it. Also Alameda County is looking at it. And so we're starting to kind of look at other opportunities to expand connection protection. On bus on shoulder, I agree that it's been in development for a very, very long time, but we are making progress. And CHP, their number one concern is safety. It's number one concern is safety. And I think we would all agree that we want to develop bus on shoulder in a very, very safe way to really meet their goals and meet the transit goals as well as the users along the corridor. And so by doing that, I think we have been working closely with CHP, Caltrans, DMV, and also the California State Transportation Agency on identifying what issues, what issues outside of safety or to address safety are really important to our partners, such as CHP. And a lot of that has to come down to making sure, as Director Ames was alluding to, it really comes down to training, really making sure that the bus drivers are trained properly to know when and how to use the shoulder. And I think the other thing is making sure that the bus drivers know how to navigate in that lane. Like, for example, we are reaching out to the experts. We actually had a call with Minnesota DOT about 3 weeks ago with Metro Transit, who's been operating bus on shoulder for the last 10, 15 years in Twin Cities and Minneapolis, Minnesota. And it was really interesting to listen to them on how they're really looking at bus on shoulder. And their training program is essentially a video and essentially on the job training. And it's really, and the other thing is enforcement. As you all know, we have a mix of private and public buses that use the corridors. And so we need to make sure that CHP has the ability to enforce the bus on shoulder lane. So that way we know that the buses that are in those lanes are certified trained drivers. And so we are proposing some sort of decal program to be able to identify which buses and which bus drivers are certified. And so all of those, and there's also, in order to enforce it, you actually have to modify the vehicle code. So what we have found over the last 12 to 18 months is that it actually is going to require legislation in order to properly enable bus on shoulder. And so that's based on our conversations with, and that's based on and we have reached out to District 11. I know Hassan, the district director, really well, and we've reached out to them. We've reached out to those people, and the consensus in the state is that legislation is needed to properly move forward bus on shoulder. And so we've developed that legislation. We're, again, like I mentioned earlier in the project updates, we're working with Assemblymember Mullins on that legislation. And that is what's going to be taken to really move this forward and making sure, again, that we meet our #1 goal to implement bus on shoulder in a very, very safe way. So those are the things I wanted to, oh, and then on the personal data, we are not trying to collect private personalized data. We would actually anonymize all of the data that we would collect. So I think that's really important to address, obviously, any concerns in terms of privacy, in terms of data. So I just wanted to address a few of those comments and happy to answer any more questions.
Great, thanks, Tim. And we have one more comment or question from Carlin Obrinker.
Thank you. So I apologize, I joined late because I was in another infrastructure transportation related meeting. But I'm just wondering, as we're talking about all of this connectivity and data collection and so forth, so I'm not sure who was surveyed for the first presentation, but I'm thinking about the people who aren't using, the smartphones and the technology, and I'm just wondering, how are we including them in this transition? Because I know that a lot of those folks, like I'm thinking of Concord residents in the monument community, for example, who don't even have smartphones, and so how are we including them? So, because many of them actually take the bus right now, and we want to ensure that they're still taking, or BART, that they're still taking public transportation in the future. So I'm just wondering, has anybody looked into that? And I know BART eliminated, for example, the paper tickets, or at least I think that they did. So how is that working out? Is that impacting, are we losing ridership because there's a certain population of folks that is not at the same technology level, I guess?
I can comment on that, Member Obringer, and then Lindsay can follow up as well if she'd like. But I think one of the things we're still doing in this corridor is we're still learning about our users based on the travel behavior research. And I think as we learn more about our users, then we can actually more target more research and outreach and engagement into those communities like you're talking about. Like, for example, our mobility as a service platform. As you know, that's primarily smartphone based. And like you say, people don't have a smartphone. So how do people are able to use? So we are considering those types of equity concerns as part of the development of the individual projects. And as those things are coming up, we are and will be doing more targeted public engagement as those projects are being developed, and also learning more about our users from the travel behavior analysis. And so, Lindsay, do you have anything else to comment on that from an engagement standpoint?
No, I think you said exactly what I was going to say.
Okay.
Okay, any other comments? We've heard from committee, we've had some other members of the public talking and members of our TAC. Anyone? Oh, Luella, please go ahead.
Yeah, admitting I cannot find the silly blue hand.
Okay.
I have two comments, one of which is on the guaranteed protection. Yeah, I can see the annoyance if it's one or two people, and I can see all the things that everybody has. But what happens if there's a Giants game or an A's game and it runs over into, midnight and above? Well, how do we get those people home? If we promise them transportation in, how do we promise them transportation out if it's beyond the hours of normal operation? And the second thing that I was concerned about is on the data sharing. I can't imagine that at this point there is any system that connects with any other system in the same language or the same thing. So there is an issue, I think, with the cost of finding the data sharing system because Bart, I know computers and sharing stuff, it doesn't go smoothly. And the last thing I have is, other than I'm hoping we improve the shoulders so the bus rides are smooth, is that how wide an area do we include if we go to fare integration? Is it only things that direct connect to a certain area, but our area goes out as far as, I think, people coming in from Stockton and Mountain House and other places. So, you know, how much integration do we need to be looking for?
So maybe I'll take the beginning of this one, and I know that Rick Ramisher, the general manager of County Connections, in the audience, and may call upon him to kind of finish and help me answer this question. But in terms of your question around events, typically there's very specific transit service provided when there are events like conferences and concerts and those types of things. So I don't think we're necessarily thinking you would have connection protection, for events, those types of situations. I think connection protection is more utilized for the average commuter on a daily basis. And then in terms of the actual the data component of it and the fare integration component of it, I know that Rick has been involved with some of the regional discussions around fare integration, and to the credit of the transit operators within Contra Costa County, there is already fare integration happening in our county with our 3 transit operators. And so that both on the and so maybe Rick, do you mind commenting on some of that, please?
Yeah, Jim. Let's see here. So there I am. Well, first, I just want to say this has been a fascinating conversation, the entire meeting, Tim, in terms of what you've got these policymakers talking about. I think they're asking the right questions for you and your team to go back and kind of work through. To fare integration, that is a huge topic in this region. It was largely driven originally by what MTC likes to call the stakeholder groups, primarily from the peninsula and Silicon Valley. It's now led to this thing called the Fare Integration Task Force, which is producing a study on the feasibility and the business case for doing a fare integration program Bay Area wide. And as Director Allen alluded to, BART and SFMTA, Muni, have a tremendous amount at stake, as we've learned through COVID, on how this is rolled out because of their great dependence on fare revenue. So it's a complicated puzzle. It has a lot of interest. It is a part of the current David Chu bill, AB 629, that will, if enacted, direct the region to implement some sort of fare integration. How far it will reach, to Luella's question, it would only encompass for the time being the 9 counties that fall under MTC's domain. So those folks that are just outside the border in San Joaquin would not be a part of that. So I don't know how that integrates with us, because we have a fair amount of service coming into through the 580 corridor, that transfers are made at Dublin BART, say the buses we run up to Bishop Branch. And then there's the Valley Link project that is becoming a big priority for folks in that part of the valley. So how that all will play out will be seen over time. But what's interesting about the 4 transit policies that was presented to you tonight is all 4 are touched on in David Chu's legislation. And all 4 are front and center of the work of the MTC Blue Ribbon Task Force. And there's likely going to be a recommendation on all 4 of those policy items this July from the Blue Ribbon Task Force that will then likely feed David Chu's legislation. So this is very topical and very interesting, and whether or not you all realize that you're having a very, very topical conversation on transit in the Bay Area that's being repeated across the 9 counties.
Great. Thank you, Rick. And I'm sure you're going to give us a similar update tomorrow morning for those of us who sit on 3CTA. But yeah, a lot of this is both the bus on the shoulder, the fare integration. Those of us who sit on County Connection Board, we've been living and breathing this for the last few months. So thank you. Okay, other comments, other questions? Anyone want to come forward? Okay, then we're going to move right on. Danielle has one more item here for informational item, also opportunity for additional feedback provided by the committee. So Danielle, do you have some probing questions to ask us to pull out more information or questions from us?
So Madam Chair, if we could, and Tim, if we could go back to the slide deck real quick, there's actually a couple of slides. I know it was a little bit awkward because we had some facilitated discussion.
Oh,
but just
okay.
to kind of wrap up the prior conversation, which actually does move us to where we're just going.
Okay, well, you keep going.
Yeah, no problem. This is exactly the conversation that we wanted to have, and some back and forth, and really happy and appreciative of Rick Ramasir and Kamala Parks, who are some of our stellar TAC members on the transit side that have been participating in these TAC ConOps working group meetings. So tonight we wanted to tee up a couple of the policy related issues focused specifically on transit, as Liz said, because it was carryover from your prior meeting where you heard a lot from the transit providers. But as you can see from the screen in front of you, there are a variety of other policy issues that need to be tackled, need to be discussed, and the program concept of operations document is not going to solve all of those. However, it is going to articulate these policy issues, and it is going to give some sort of sense of the priority and the time frame for addressing some of these, because as we just heard, some of these policy issues tie directly to larger regional conversations. So inevitably, the time frame for resolution on some of these will be tied to some external factors that are driven by some regional conversations. On the flip side, some of the policy issues you have more control over locally, still going to require some discussion. And so the concept of operations document is going to kind of lay all that out and start to point us towards future conversations, future steps, future agreements, all of that. So what's shown in blue are just some, not all, of the additional policy issues that we intend to bring forth to you all in your subsequent PAC meetings. They'll be brought forward in strategic and meaningful chunks, which allow for the kind of dialogue that we just had. So that's to kind of just put a bow on this particular conversation. And then to go back to what you were just saying a moment ago, Madam Chair, I think that does lead in directly. Tim, if you could go forward in the deck. Sorry, I forgot there's one other slide in terms of a look ahead, in terms of engagement for you all. So what's before you is kind of the timeline for this program concept of operations document. So as you can see, we've been working on it really over the last year with the TAC ConOps working group. We're looking to have a first draft that will be submitted to your staff, that staff level, at the end of April. And we are looking to have a series of individual meetings. So that's why you see when you look to the line that says TAC ConOps working group, there's only a star as if that's needed for the whole group as a collective, but rather the bar right below it indicates that all throughout May, we're going to be having one-on-one meetings to talk through any of the specific technical and policy issues. So your staff will be getting pinged for that. And then you all, as indicated by the triangle lines, you guys will be meeting in June, towards the end of June, and then in October. So we'll be bringing some of these policy issues back to you. So it's a continuing conversation. It's not a one and done. And as your staff review this concept of operations document, if they start to identify additional policy issues, things that go beyond what we've already identified and articulated, we will most be certainly feeding that in and then bringing that back to you all as appropriate for discussion. And then last but not least, as mentioned earlier, there are going to be board briefings so that the rest of your colleagues that sit on the CCTA board can be brought up to speed on some of these issues that you all have been diving much more deeply into. So that's the quick look ahead for the next 6 months and getting us across the finish line to have a first draft of a program concept of operations.
Okay, that is very helpful. And then I guess I would just ask board member or committee members, anyone have any follow-up for Danielle, things that you think we also should be including, or any suggestions with the timeline? Not seen any. Anyone else from the community? Okay, so just to wrap things up with you, Danielle, do you have any other comments, discussion items you want to put before us?
Additional items to put before you. Can you go to the next slide, Tim? So this is just a quick look ahead for what those future meeting dates are. Well, we will be bringing back some of those additional policy items to you all. And now would be the time, if there's anything additional on your end that you would like to hear more about, even if it's not the specific policy issues, if it's any more of the projects, project updates, if it's anything else that you all would like to hear on your next couple agendas for the PAC, now would be the time for you to share that with us, and we'll be happy to agendize it for the future.
Okay, or if you think of something in the middle of the night, as some of us may be prone to do, you can email Danielle then.
Yes, I will take emails at all times of night. That's true.
So, okay, anyone have any suggestions right now, things that they think have not, again, this is such a comprehensive look for those of us who looked at the 680 corridor many times on many different committees. This is probably the most comprehensive look that I've seen. Tim, what have you got for us?
I just to kind of piggyback on what Rick was saying. I just really appreciate your time to this evening, your feedback, your comments. You're absolutely asking the right questions, and like Rick was saying, this conversation is extremely timely as it relates to what's happening in the rest of the region. So I really appreciate the feedback, and this is actually really exciting for us to get this feedback from you, and really appreciate your time and thoughtfulness.
Okay, well, thank you, Tim. And again, you've teed it up very nicely for us to have this discussion. Okay, any other comments from the committee or from the members of the public present tonight? Then we're going to just continue on with our agenda. Correspondence, communications, anything that you wish to highlight, Tim, or anyone else? See none, then we are going to adjourn until our June 30th meeting at 6:00 p.m. We will be starting right at 6 o'clock, not waiting for anyone who's not there on time. No, absolutely. We look forward to seeing all of you there, and thank you all for participating, and we'll see many of you in the morning. Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.